The studio was cold, not temperature cold, but atmosphere cold. The kind of cold that comes from too many lights and too many cameras and too many people watching something that's supposed to feel intimate but never actually is. Derek Morgan sat across from Michael Bublé in Studio 4A, surrounded by an audience of 300 people who'd lined up at dawn for tickets. Behind the cameras, producer Samantha Cross watched the monitors with hawk-like focus. Everything was timed perfectly, every question vetted, every emotional beat choreographed. The cameras were live, millions were watching from home, everything was going exactly as planned. Until it wasn't. The interview had started well. Derek Morgan was a professional, 15 years hosting one of the highest-rated talk shows on television. He knew how to put guests at ease, how to make celebrities feel comfortable enough to be interesting without being vulnerable enough to regret it later. Michael arrived wearing a suit, his signature charm on full display. They talked about his latest album, about touring, about the difference between singing standards and writing original material. The audience laughed at the right moments. Michael was warm, funny, the perfect guest. 14 minutes in, Derek shifted in his seat. "I want to talk about something more personal," Derek said, his voice taking on that tone of manufactured intimacy that talk show hosts perfect over years of practice. "You've been through something incredibly difficult recently. Your son Noah's illness." Michael's smile didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. A shift so subtle that if you weren't looking closely, you'd miss it. "We have, Michael said carefully, but he's doing well now. We're very grateful." Derek nodded, leaning forward. "It must have been terrifying. As a father myself, I can't imagine what you went through. Can you talk about that time? What it was like watching your child suffer?" The audience was silent. The cameras zoomed in slightly. This was the moment Derek had been building toward, the emotional vulnerability that would make clips go viral, that would get shared across social media, that would remind people why his show mattered. Michael's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "It was difficult, but Noah is strong and private, so I'd rather not." Of course, Derek interrupted smoothly. "I respect that, but surely you can share what it was like for you and your wife during that time. How did Luisana cope? How did you stay strong for each other?" Michael's hands gripped the armrests of his chair. The smile was still there, but it was frozen now. A mask. "Derek, I appreciate the question, but my family's medical journey isn't something I want to discuss in detail. What I will say is that we're incredibly grateful for the doctors, for the support we received, and for the fact that Noah is healthy now." Derek sensed resistance, and like all good television hosts, he pushed harder. "Because resistance means emotion. Emotion means ratings. I understand," Derek said, his voice dripping with false empathy, "but I think our audience, many of whom are parents themselves, would find it meaningful to hear how you navigated that darkness. When you're watching your child in pain, when the treatments are brutal, when you don't know if they're going to make it, how does a father handle that?" The audience murmured their agreement. Yes, they wanted to know. They deserved to know. Michael was a public figure. This was the price of fame. Michael's eyes went flat. The smile disappeared completely. "My son was 3 years old," he said quietly, each word carefully controlled. "He was terrified, in pain, going through treatments that no child should have to endure. And you want me to describe that? You want me to perform my family's trauma for entertainment?" Derek's own smile faltered. "Michael, I'm not asking you to perform anything. I'm asking you to share your experience, to help other parents who might be going through." "No," Michael interrupted. His voice was still quiet, but there was steel in it now. "You're asking me to exploit my son's suffering for ratings. There's a difference." The studio went completely silent. The audience stopped murmuring. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. Derek tried to recover. "I think that's a bit harsh." Simply, Michael reached up and removed his lapel microphone. The small gesture was deafening in the silence. "What are you doing?" Derek asked, his professional veneer cracking slightly. "I'm leaving," Michael said calmly. He stood up, carefully unhooking the battery pack from his belt and placing it on the chair. "Thank you for having me, Derek, but I'm done." "Michael, we're live. We have 7 more minutes. Then you have 7 minutes to fill," Michael said. He turned to the audience. "I apologize for the disruption, but some things are more important than television." He walked off the set. The cameras stayed on Derek's shocked face for several seconds before cutting to commercial. By the time the show came back, Derek had regained his composure, making a joke about difficult guests and moving on to the next segment. But the damage was done. Within an hour, clips of Michael walking off were everywhere. Social media exploded. Think pieces appeared before the show even ended. Michael Bublé walks out of live interview. Singer refuses to discuss son's illness. Awkward moment on Derek Morgan's show. The opinions were split. Half the internet praised Michael for setting boundaries, for protecting his family, for refusing to commodify his child's trauma. The other half called him difficult, accused him of being ungrateful for the platform, suggested that if he didn't want to talk about his life, he shouldn't be a celebrity. Derek Morgan watched the fallout from his dressing room, his publicist standing beside him reviewing the trending topics. "This could be good for us," she said. "Controversy drives viewership. Will trend for days." Derek nodded absently, but something felt wrong. He'd interviewed hundreds of celebrities over 15 years, politicians who'd lied to his face, actors promoting bad movies with fake enthusiasm, musicians going through public meltdowns. He'd navigated it all with professional detachment. But Michael's walkout was different, because Michael hadn't been difficult or temperamental or throwing a tantrum. He'd been a father protecting his child, and Derek had pushed him to that point. The more Derek thought about it, the more uncomfortable he became. He replayed the interview in his mind, the way Michael's smile had frozen when the questions turned to Noah. Careful control in his voice as he tried to redirect. The moment Derek had pushed past that boundary anyway, framing it as concern when it was really just content gathering. 2 hours after the show ended, Derek's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "I thought as a father you'd understand. I was wrong." And Derek stared at the message, just 2 sentences, but they hit harder than any public statement could have. He thought about his own children, Emma, 7. Jacob, 5. He thought about the time Emma had needed surgery for a hernia, the terror he'd felt, the helplessness, the way she'd looked at him with complete trust, believing her father could protect her from anything when he felt completely powerless. He imagined someone asking him to describe that on television, to perform his fear and pain for an audience, to make entertainment out of his daughter's suffering. The thought made him physically ill. Derek texted back, "Can we talk? Not for the show, just 2 fathers, please." No response. 3 days passed. The controversy continued to rage online. Derek's show saw a spike in ratings. His producers were thrilled. But Derek couldn't shake the feeling that he'd done something fundamentally wrong. On the 4th day, his phone rang, Michael's number. "I'm listening," Michael said when Derek answered. "I'm sorry," Derek said immediately. "I was wrong. I was thinking like a host instead of a human being, and I'm sorry." Silence on the other end. "My daughter had surgery last year," Derek continued. "Nothing life-threatening, but it was scary. And if someone had asked me to describe watching her in pain, to relive that fear for entertainment, I would have punched them. But you asked me to do exactly that," Michael said quietly. "I know, and I'm ashamed. I told myself it was journalism, that it was giving you a platform to help others. But honestly, I was chasing a viral moment. I was using your trauma to make good television, and that's inexcusable." Another long silence. "Do you know what the worst part was?" Michael finally said. "It wasn't the questions. I've dealt with invasive questions before. It was that you specifically mentioned being a father. You used your own fatherhood as a reason I should trust you, should open up to you. And then you asked me to perform my child's suffering. That felt like a betrayal." Derek felt like he'd been punched. "You're right. I weaponized our shared experience as fathers to manipulate you into giving me what I wanted. That's worse than just being invasive. That's cruel." He heard Michael take a breath on the other end. "I appreciate the apology," Michael said, "but an apology to me doesn't fix what you did. You didn't just hurt me. You sent a message to every parent watching that it's acceptable to demand details about a child's medical trauma. That privacy doesn't matter if someone's famous." "How do I fix that?" Derek asked. "I don't know if you can," Michael said honestly, "but you could start by thinking about why you thought it was okay in the first place. And maybe, before you ask your next guest to share their worst moment, ask yourself if you'd be willing to share yours." The call ended. Derek sat in his office for a long time, staring at his phone. Then he did something he'd never done in 15 years of hosting. He called his producers and told them he wanted to address the incident on air, not to defend himself, to apologize publicly. "That's career suicide," his producer said. "You don't apologize for doing your job." "It wasn't my job," Derek said. "It was cruelty disguised as journalism, and I need to own that." The next show opened not with the usual monologue, but with Derek sitting alone on set, no audience, no guests. "I need to talk about what happened with Michael Bublé," he began. "I've spent the last week reading comments, seeing the debate, watching people defend my right to ask tough questions. and they're not entirely wrong. Part of my job is to ask questions that make people uncomfortable. But there's a line between journalism and exploitation, and I crossed it. He looked directly into the camera. Michael Bublé's son went through a medical crisis. His family went through hell, and I asked him to perform that hell for entertainment. I told myself it was to help other families, to create meaningful conversation, but honestly, I wanted a viral moment. I wanted the emotional clip that would get shared and talked about. I wanted ratings, and I used his child's suffering to get them. Derek's voice cracked slightly. As a father myself, I should have known better. I should have understood that some experiences are too sacred to commodify, but I was thinking like a host instead of a human being, and Michael called me on it. He set a boundary. He said no, and he shouldn't have had to. I should never have put him in that position. He paused. So I'm apologizing, not just to Michael and his family, but to every parent who's watched their child suffer and felt the pressure to perform that pain for others. You don't owe anyone your trauma, not me, not any interviewer. Privacy isn't a luxury for the rich and famous. It's a human right, and I forgot that. The monologue went viral faster than the walkout had. The response was overwhelming. Some accused Derek of performative apology, of trying to salvage his image. But many recognized it as genuine, a rare moment of actual accountability in an industry built on deflection and spin. Michael saw it. He didn't respond publicly. But 3 days later, Derek received a package at his office. Inside was a children's book, a story about a dragon who learned that not all treasure should be shared, that some things are meant to be kept safe and private. The inscription read, "For Emma and Jacob, may they grow up in a world that respects their boundaries, and may their father help build that world." Michael Bublé. Derek kept the book on his desk. A reminder. 6 months later, Michael released a statement announcing that Noah was in full remission. The statement was brief, factual, and ended with a single line: "We ask for privacy as our family continues to heal." Most media outlets respected it. Derek's show was one of them. They never spoke again. There was no tearful reunion, no on-air reconciliation, no redemption arc. But Derek had learned something that changed how he approached every interview afterward. He started asking himself, before every difficult question, would I want to answer this about my own child, about my own worst moment, about my own family's trauma? If the answer was no, he didn't ask it. His ratings didn't suffer. In fact, his show became known for something different, for giving celebrities space to be human without demanding they be vulnerable, for respecting boundaries instead of pushing through them. And every time a producer suggested a juicy, personal question, Derek would glance at the children's book on his desk and remember the look in Michael Bublé's eyes the moment before he walked out. Some interviews end with applause, some end with laughter, and some end with a lesson. The lesson Derek Morgan learned was simple but profound. Being a good interviewer isn't about getting people to reveal their pain. It's about respecting them enough to let them keep it private. Years later, a journalism student asked Derek about his biggest on-air mistake. Michael Bublé, Derek said without hesitation, "I asked him to exploit his son's illness for ratings. He walked out, and he was right to. Do you regret losing that interview?" The student asked. "I regret asking those questions," Derek corrected. The walkout, that was the most honest moment I've ever broadcast, because it showed that there are some things more important than television, more important than ratings, more important than getting the story. Like what? Like being human, Derek said simply. Like protecting the people you love. Like having the courage to say no when someone crosses a line. He thought about the text message Michael had sent. "I thought, as a father, you'd understand." Now he did, not because of what he'd asked during that interview, but because of what Michael had taught him by walking away. Some lessons come from success, others come from failure. The most important ones come from the moments when someone you've wronged shows you exactly who you could have been if only you'd been paying attention. Derek kept the children's book on his desk for the rest of his career, a reminder that the best interviews aren't always the ones that make you cry. Sometimes they're the ones that make you think. And sometimes the most important thing an interviewer can do is know when to stop asking questions and start listening to the silence that says, "This is where my privacy begins." And your curiosity ends. Michael Bublé never returned to Derek Morgan's show. He never publicly forgave him. He never gave the full story of Noah's illness to anyone. And that, Derek finally understood, was his right, not as a celebrity, but as a father, as a human being, as someone who understood that not everything meaningful needs to be shared. Some Stories are meant to be lived privately. Some triumphs are too precious to perform, some pain is too sacred to commodify, and the people who understand that difference, those are the ones worth learning from, even if the lesson costs you an interview.